I'm Justin Silverman of the New England First Amendment Coalition. Thank you for joining us for this introductory lesson on New England state courts. This lesson is the latest of many provided by NEFAC that explore state freedom of information laws. We want you to know how to access government information, and these lessons are the best place to start. If you haven't already, please check out our classes on state public record and open meeting laws, as well as the Federal Freedom of Information Act. Each class builds off one another, and they all collectively provide a curriculum you won't find anywhere else. All lessons are at nefac.org/FOI guide. They're also on our YouTube channel, 5 Freedoms. Before we begin today's lesson, a special thanks to everyone who is helping us make these classes happen. The Society of Professional Journalists Foundation, SPJ New England, the Rhode Island Foundation, and the New England Society of News Editors. We appreciate everyone's support. Now, to introduce you to today's instructor, Emily Sweeney.
Hey everybody, I'm Emily Sweeney. I'm with the Boston Globe, and I want to thank you for joining us for this webinar, which is brought to you by the New England First Amendment Coalition. This session is going to focus on state courts in Massachusetts, and with us is Ruth Bourquin, and she's the senior and managing attorney at the ACLU of Massachusetts, and she's going to give us a general overview of how the courts work in the Bay State. Ruth, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I was asked to give sort of an overview of the Massachusetts court system and also some general tips on how journalists and others can go about obtaining some basic information about cases that may be pending in those courts. So we'll take it from the top. And the Supreme Judicial Court is the highest level court in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In many other states, it would be referred to as the state Supreme Court. But ours was named the Supreme Judicial Court a long time ago, before lots of other states even had courts, by John Adams and others in our state constitution. The Supreme Judicial Court, as the highest court in the state, hears appeals from the courts that are below it in hierarchy, including the Massachusetts Appeals Courts, which is the second level highest court in the Commonwealth. And every once in a while, the Supreme Judicial Court, or SJC as we call it, will actually take cases directly from the trial courts and bypass the appeals court when they think those cases are really important and involve issues of statewide importance. There is a clerk's office for virtually every court in the Commonwealth, and the SJC is no exception. And the people at the clerk's office for the SJC are very helpful people. So if you want information about a case that's pending there, you can visit their office, which is right behind my office at 1 Pemberton Square, or contact them by phone or email. And then in addition, as shown on our slide, there's an online portal where you can get information about cases pending before the SJC or the Mass Appeals Court. And that's www.ma-appellatecourts.org. And virtually every case that's pending there is listed and tells what action is pending, what date the oral argument is scheduled, and oftentimes the briefs in the case will even be posted there. So you can get a lot of information from that website. Before we leave the Supreme Judicial Court, I just wanted to point out there's sort of a weird quirk with our SJC, that it has in addition to being the highest appellate court in the state, it has an arm called the Supreme Judicial Court for Suffolk County, which is actually a trial court where cases can be filed in the first instance. And it happens to be the oldest continuously serving trial court in the country. Once upon a time, this is where all the judges came from, and they'd get on their ponies and ride from county to county to hear cases. And this court is still in existence, and the judges in this court are the members of the Supreme Judicial Court for the Commonwealth, who take turns hearing cases there, often hear motions related to cases that are pending before the court, or they can be originally filed cases that the court will take in the first instance. And that office has its own clerk's office, so you want to look for the SJC for the clerk for the Supreme Judicial Court for Suffolk County if you're looking to talk to the clerk on a case that's pending there. So then the next step down in the hierarchy of Massachusetts court is the Massachusetts Appeals Court. And that is a court that was created more recently. And as the number of cases have expanded, so has the Massachusetts Appeals Court, because there are just a lot of cases that come through the trial courts and need to be heard by an appellate court. And the SJC doesn't have the time or the number of justices to hear them all. So this court too is a very important court because its rulings have a statewide effect. And they hear most of the appeals from all the trial courts in the state, other than the ones that the SJC takes on direct appellate view, and therefore they bypass the clerk's office. You can get information about cases pending in the appeals court through the same website where you can get the information about the SJC cases. And of course, the appeals court has its own clerk's office where you can often get information, and they're also very helpful. Then below the Massachusetts Appeals Court are the trial courts of the Commonwealth. And there's definitely an S on the end of courts because there are a lot of different trial courts in Massachusetts that are essentially broken down in some ways by the kinds of cases they hear. The people probably hear most often about the Superior Court because it has the broadest jurisdiction. It can hear all sorts of cases where people are asking for an injunction to stop somebody from doing something they think is harmful. It has jurisdiction to hear cases where somebody's seeking damages for harm they may have suffered. It hears a lot of not just civil cases of the kind that I was just talking about, but also criminal cases. The most serious crimes are tried in the first instance in the Superior Court. And every county in the Commonwealth has a branch of the Superior Court in it. So you'll hear about the Superior Court for Suffolk County, the Superior Court for Norfolk County, etc. Every county has one of those. Other courts that also have courtrooms in various all the counties in the state include the district courts, which are in some ways have jurisdiction similar to the Superior Court, but like on criminal matters, they can only deal with less serious criminal matters than the Superior Court can handle. The Boston Municipal Court is part of the district court system, as is the court called the Small Claims Court. People often hear about that, where you have a dispute for just a small amount of money. That's a part of the district courts, and those are scattered throughout the Commonwealth. And it's one of the trial courts. Another kind of trial court is the juvenile court that focuses largely, as its name implies, on matters involving young people and their family members. There's the housing court that deals with matters involving housing, including now, unfortunately, a lot of eviction actions since the moratorium on evictions are over. There's the probate and family court, which deals with resolving issues under wills, as well as child custody issues, a variety of things that affect family life among families in the Commonwealth. And then there's one called the land court, which does something related to land, but I have to admit, I've never been before the land court, so I'm not sure exactly what they do and how it's different from the housing court. There is on the website that's posted on this screen, there are descriptions that the state puts up of each of the courts, and we're going to have a copy of those summaries and materials that are saved for later that give the state's description of each of those courts. So it helps people try to figure out where a case they may be interested in could be pending. Okay. So people often want to know, well, putting aside what are all these different courts, how do I find out what's going on there? And how do I track what's going on in the court systems? And one of the most common ways that people, members of the public, look for information about a case, you may hear that, oh, there's a case pending in Concord District Court that sounds interesting. I want to see what's going on with that. You can go to this website that's listed here, masscourts.org, and assure them that you're not a robot. And then you can get into the system, and whether if you know the case number or you know one of the parties' names, you can search for cases there. And often, particularly in cases that don't involve criminal charges against someone, a lot of the information about the case will be in mass courts. Oftentimes, the complaint that's been filed, if there have been motions filed to dismiss the case, or other things, those will actually be linked in this database. So it's very helpful way to get up to speed on what the status of the case is and what's been filed in the case. You can also access information about some criminal cases, most criminal cases through this database. But we have noticed that particularly in criminal cases, the information that's actually posted there is not as complete as in some civil cases. And I think that may be about trying to protect people's privacy a little bit, et cetera. But my colleagues have pointed out to me that if a lawyer who's a member of the Bar Association gets on this website, and there's a place to log in on the top right side, and you give them your bar number, et cetera, sometimes more information magically appears on the page. So if in terms of getting more information through mass courts, it can be helpful to be friends with a lawyer and get a little more information there. But with regard to any case, you can just contact the clerk for the court where the case is pending, or go visit, and you can obtain records there without having to go through the mass court system. So if there's something you would anticipate to be there and you don't see it on the mass court's website, you may want to contact the clerk. I do see that there's comment about certain housing court matters are not fully available on mass courts. That's also true for juvenile court matters, various things where there are a different level of privacy concerns. So if you don't see things there, I wouldn't stop there, is what I'm saying, is that you think there are materials you might be interested in, you might want to contact the court or go visit the court. In terms of what are people's rights to get information about court proceedings, there are various principles that apply, and there are a couple that don't apply. So for instance, the Massachusetts Public Records Law, that I think we all probably use quite a bit to try to get information from government agencies, police departments, et cetera, about things that are going on, that does not apply to court records. The SJC many years ago interpreted the statute. They found that the legislature did not intend it to apply to the courts, and that there might be separation of powers problems if it did. So don't bother doing a public records request to the courts, because it probably won't help you get the information. There is, however, a general common law principle. So that means it predates even the creation of the Constitution, et cetera, that establishes a presumptive right of access to court proceedings and court records. And in certain situations, the First Amendment to the US Constitution also gives a right of access to certain court proceedings. And the SJC and other bodies, the SJC in particular has created a uniform set of rules on public access to court records that sort of reflect both the common law and the First Amendment principle about access to the courts. That can be helpful for if there are certain things you're looking for, maybe go back and look at the rules to see what the court is saying about what is available when. You can go ahead to the next page. So while there is this presumption of access, particularly under the common law, a right of access to court records is not absolute. And this relates to what's available online in some respects. Juvenile court proceedings and the records of those are generally closed to the public to protect the privacy of juveniles, with certain limited exceptions. And there are other court materials and proceedings that are made non-public by state statute. I put an example of a document that I found online that had, it's outdated in a way, so there may be more things that have been found by the legislature not to be public records. And then in other situations, courts have some discretion in terms of deciding whether they will limit access, limit the public availability of certain records, but they are required to try to balance in making those decisions the right of privacy of individuals, or the right, for instance, of a criminal defendant to get a fair trial against the interests of the public, and knowing what the courts are doing in their name and how they're behaving and how people are being treated. So there's sort of a balancing process that goes on. You can go to the next page there. I mean, one of the places where this comes up is with respect to criminal offender record information, results of criminal proceedings can often be sealed under state law. That was a case, and the principles of whether creating a situation where court records can be sealed, whether that violates either the First Amendment or this common law right of public access, was discussed in an important case called Commonwealth v. Pond in 2014. And lo and behold, it was discussed again just this past Friday in a case from the SJC called Commonwealth versus JF, the initials JF, where the court was discussing the legislature's choice to have more things sealed in terms of criminal records so that people can get on with their lives without having these secondary consequences, collateral consequences from having been put through the criminal process. And there's some tension between that and having openness of court records, and the court discussed it again this past Friday, and reaffirmed in many ways the notion that the legislature does have the power in appropriate circumstances to dictate that things will be sealed for instance, where people have been acquitted of crimes, so that, and balancing the interests of people getting on with their lives without being subject to collateral consequences where they can't get jobs, et cetera, and housing. In addition to some of these things that are set up by statute, a court may, what they call, impound certain court records or proceedings to protect privacy or a party's right to a fair trial. And there are specific rules for impoundment of cases. And because the interest in access to the courts is one that applies to the public, often to journalists, but also to other members of the public, there's actually a procedure whereby if someone feels that materials in a case have been improperly impounded, that they can appeal that to the appeals court. So there may be times when a court says we're impounding things, and there could be a suspicion that, well, what's really going on is they're trying to protect people whose privacy rights don't deserve to be protected, et cetera. And there's a way to ask the appellate courts to rule on whether the proper balance has been struck. One other thing I just want to note is, partly because my office has worked hard on these issues, is that the SJC has noted that certain public employees, including police officers, have less of a right of privacy as to criminal charges and things that are cast a light on how they're conducting themselves as public figures. So particularly in instances, if you see things that are being impounded that relate to the conduct of public officials in their public capacities, that might be a place where it's worth questioning whether or not impoundment is appropriate. Could go on to the, okay, yes. So part of the, and oftentimes cases reach the Supreme Judicial Court or the Appeals Court, and they've been impounded below, or they're impounded again at the appellate level. And one of the, and that would mean, as a general matter, that the briefs are not available to be seen by the public. The clerk of the SJC in particular has been very good about asking the parties to file a version of their brief that simply omits or redacts any impounded information, but makes the rest of it public. And so that if there's a case going on at the appellate courts that seem, you know, many of them have an important public impact, there are ways that briefs can be made available even in impounded cases, so as to protect whatever the interests that are being served by impoundment is, but don't take the case all the way out of the public sphere. So I think it's good for all of us to be asking for those things in cases that seem to matter for us, have a particular public importance. Let's see. Well, that is a very quick and dirty overview of the state court system, and a very general description of ways you might be able to collect some information. Just to review, a good first step is checking the online dockets, whether it's the appellate one or the mass courts docket, and see what's there as a starting point for gathering information. But then you might always want to contact one way or another the clerk's office to determine if there are other things available that are not posted there, so that you can get a sense of everything that's going on in the case to the maximum extent possible.
I did see somebody make a comment. Actually, our friend of NEFAC and a board member, Todd Wallach, mentioned about Massachusetts having a law that automatically impounds any material in court cases that originally come from a grand jury, even after criminal charges are brought, which I am also unfortunately familiar with.
Wow.
It's also kind of frustrating, but I don't know if Ruth, if you want to mention anything about that. But
I think we should ask Todd to mention. I actually I haven't done a lot of work on the criminal side, so I'm not, I wasn't really tuned into that, but, be interesting to hear more what the rationale is for that.
Yeah, that is true. Very true.
It's impounded after an indictment does issue?
Todd was saying that automatically impounds any material in court cases that originally come from a grand jury.
Oh,
Even
yeah,
from the
grand
charges
jury
I've brought.
secrecy. There is
Yeah.
sort of a special place in law, whether there should be or not, for grand jury proceedings. I think part of that originates from long history of trying to make sure people are willing to be on grand juries and to make sure that the grand jury process isn't unduly influenced by outside forces, but it does seem like a concept that might have some room for revisiting in these modern times when a lot of the information comes out through the trial, etc.
Yeah, just because again, Todd was just talking about in the chat about how he was unable to view a motion in a criminal case. Now, normally motions and exhibits in criminal cases are public unless a judge seals them, he was saying. And he
Yes.
just said that he thinks that this might be unique to Massachusetts. And there's some question, Todd says, as to whether
Yes.
the Massachusetts law is constitutional. That's a really good point, Todd.
Yeah,
That would
yeah.
be great if I thought, yeah, we should probably have like a whole separate discussion on that. I mean, as a
Right.
reporter, I know it's like very frustrating, you know what I mean?
Right.
Not being able to access that
Yes.
anything from grand juries. So that's a really good point. I want to thank everybody in our live audience who tuned in. Ruth, I want to thank you so much for that great overview and the PowerPoint. It was really helpful. And everybody, be sure to check out our other classes online. You can find them on NEFAC's website and our YouTube channel. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.